Stories have been around since the beginning of time. At first, they were only oral stories, which meant that if Grandma around the campfire decided not to tell a story, it was just forgotten. And these stories had a certain structure to them, which is the traditional story structure. It goes basically like this. There's the hero's good. Then there's an obstacle to test if that hero's really good. And then there's the bad guy, he's evil, and he's gonna stay evil. And usually these stories have a good ending, except for when it's a drama, which is when everyone at the end dies, or if it's for educational purposes, to basically say, don't do that or you end up like the character in the story. Don't do it, don't. And with the development of writing in ancient Mesopotamia, Grandma's stories from the campfire became clay tablets, then papyrus scrolls, and eventually books all around the world. And that had two consequences. One, Grandma didn't have to remember all of her stories, which meant that they didn't change every single time she told them. And two, there was now a place where you could just go in and read hundreds of years of stories, and you could get influenced by them and inspired and write more of these stories. Yeah, after a long time came the year 1888. And what happened there, you might ask? The first ever movie was released. It is 22 seconds long, it has no sound, no color, and basically no storyline, and it looked like this. It basically repeats for 22 seconds. That's pretty boring. But it is a pretty important thing to happen because more and more of these movies came out. And at first they were only comedy clips about like 1 minute long, black and white, and they had no sounds, which meant that they were accompanied by a live orchestra. But a few years later, in 1903, the first ever action movie was released. The name is The Great Train Robbery. And guess what happens in the movie? A train gets robbed by a few thieves who later then get caught. And it is 10 minutes long, it is in black and white, and it still has no sound. But a few years later, in 1928, Walt Disney created the first ever cartoon. It was 8 minutes long, still black and white, and no sound, but it featured a mouse called Mortimer Mouse, which then later became Mickey Mouse. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him, but yeah. And with all the movies at that time, it always had a good ending. But people got bored of that. It was always the same. Problem appears, problem gets solved. Problem appears, oh my god, it got solved. So the movie makers had to get creative. How do we get the people to come to the cinema and spend all their money here? They invented the plot twist. Well, they didn't really invent it because it was already used in old fairy tales like Odysseus or the Hercules. But it was never really used in movies before. But even that got boring at some point. So in 1925, Rouben Mamoulian created the first ever colored film. Even though a lot of people think Lost in Oz was the first colored film, that's not really true. Because the breakthrough of colored movies came in 1937 with Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The development of colored TV began in the early 1920s, but it was first used in 1954. But with all that said, there was still the idea around that nobody wanted to see their favorite characters die, until the concept of kill your darlings slowly surfaced over the years. And it is originally used by William Faulkner, an American writer, and it basically means to kill a good or important character for plot progression or to bring in new elements. And a pretty famous example of that is the series Game of Thrones, where as soon as you had a favorite character, they were just killed immediately. And with that example, we are already in the modern times, where 4 million books and 7,000 movies per year get released. And nowadays, it's hard to say, what is a movie? How long does a movie have to be? I mean, there are movies that are like 30 minutes long. They don't get released into the cinemas, but they still exist. And the first movie I showed you, that was 22 seconds long. Can we count every TikTok also as a movie? And yes, that means that standards are getting higher and higher. It's hard to create something new that no one has ever seen before. But when you do, it's all the more amazing. So I recommend that you keep trying, and who knows, maybe one of you will create a new element of storytelling because you are bored. Thank you for listening.